So I'd like to introduce our speaker today. It's our very own Bill Zotter. Please give him a warm welcome. And I'll let Bill take it from here. Oh, I'm sorry. By the way, Ruth, could you pass the basket while Bill gets started?
Thank you, Butch. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Am I holding the mic at the right spot? I've never done this before, so.
You could be a little closer.
Maybe a little closer? That's better? All right.
That's good.
That guy says good. All right, so 5'9", how I explain privilege to my children. This talk came out of a discussion I had with my daughter, Zipporah, who's here. Just discussing kind of racism and things going on in her school, and the question came up, why can't some people see how privileged they are and racism and sexism in their lives? So the analogy I came up with to try to explain it to her is this. And so we had the norms, right? The norms are kind of a unified group of people. There's more than one. And they all get together, and they're all pretty much the same. So in their society, they're all about the same height and same dimensions. And this actually, norms, this is a long time ago, and back then they had funny hats. So the guys with the funny hats get together, and they start building a society. And that society is, houses, and these houses, of course, are sized for them. So build some more houses, and then eventually they build the tallest house in town, and this is the best view, the best house there. And this house is success. So to get to success, you have to climb a ladder. So how do they decide who gets to get to success? And what they came up with is an obstacle course called the rat race. So if you're building an obstacle course, what are you going to do? Maybe you'll have a wall. And that wall, you're not going to make it too short, right? If it's too short, then anyone can just get right over it. There it goes. It's too easy. You make the wall too tall, and people can't get up it, right? It's too hard. So you're going to size the wall to match who you are, right? So the norms are all the same. They match the wall to their height. So it's hard, but they can all do it. Just right. Now, it'd be a pretty boring obstacle course if it was just a wall, right? So they add some other activities, right? You have a tunnel to crawl through, some monkey bars, a mud pit, and then you get to the finish line. And just like the wall, the rest of these obstacles are sized for them. Right? They can do these obstacles with some difficulty, but they're all achievable.
I thought that was a crusher.
You were in the Army, weren't you?
Yeah. Oh, I should have prefaced this. I'm not an artist. I'm also an old white guy, so, So anyway, but they can get to it, and it's still a race, so there's a winner. They get a nice fancy medal. I keep pressing the wrong button. And then that person gets to go up to success. So the norms are not the only people in the world, right? They would have you believe they did this all themselves. But the reality is there was also smalls and the talls. So the smalls and the talls weren't really allowed in their society. But again, norms won't tell you this. They actually helped to build the society. So they helped to build the society, but they weren't allowed to get to success. And they weren't really allowed to participate. So now, as I said, this happened a very long time ago, right? Guys with funny hats. So it's been many years since then. There was a time when people were wearing funny wigs, and then less funny hats. Even this period with dunce caps, I don't know what that was about, but
The
That
80s.
was, what's that?
That was the 80s.
The 80s. You remember it well.
Oh, yeah.
So now, so it's more modern day, and it's modern day, and the norms, everything's pretty much still the same, right? They fit into their society, but they didn't actually build it. Right? This is just how things always were for them, the people that are alive today. They fit well into their world, and it just seems this is how it's always been. And same thing with the rat race, right? The rat race was designed by people with funny hats a long time ago, right? And they're successful at it, but to them, this is just how it's always been. So the smalls and the talls, they didn't really like this. They didn't like not being part of society. So what are they going to do? They're going to protest, get lots of signs, be really annoying, more protests, and eventually they won a right to the society of Normtown. But since they didn't fit that well into the society, right, smalls had trouble reaching the ladder, and the talls had to duck their heads all the time, right? Imagine walking through life and always having to be wary and duck your head or you get your head bashed in. So that's the life they lived. And the rat race, same thing. And now they had access to the rat race, but the smalls couldn't get up the wall, and the talls had trouble climbing through the tunnel. So it really wasn't fair. But of course, the norms didn't see that. They just saw, hey, I can win the race. I win, I'm the best. Not realizing that they kind of have an unfair advantage. But to them, it's not unfair. They didn't actually do it. This happened before they were even born. The world was set up this way. And not all the norms kind of were accepting of the smalls and the talls. Some of them would see the smalls struggling to try and get up the ladder and be heightist, right? Smalls are so weak, right? It's their fault. They can't do it, right? That's just how they are. Talls would smash their head, right? Clumsy talls. It's their fault. They should have ducked their head. What was wrong with them? Oh, don't use the C word, by the way. They get very offended. And then we have, call him woke man, right? So this guy realizes, I know what the problem is. All I have to do is treat everyone the same. That's the solution, right? We're not heightist. If we treat everyone the same, everything's going to be fine. I don't even see height. I don't know how many people have heard people say things like that, right? Everyone's the same to me. Solve's got a little Superman cape on there, right? In his mind, this fixes it. Everyone just has to stop being heightist and all the problems are solved. But they're not really solved, right? The world around us hasn't changed just by saying, I don't see height. You see him, thanks, right? Thanks for not seeing my height, ignoring the things that are going on around me. And it also doesn't change the rat race, right? Just saying, oh, I don't see height, I ignore it, doesn't make it any easier for the smalls or the talls. And of course, the norms still end up winning the race. Win, I'm the best. Again, from his perspective, I didn't cheat. I went through the same obstacles that they had to go through. I'm just better, right? I won. Right? I'm a billionaire. I deserve it, right? Pressing the wrong button. And it's kind of how privilege is. It's like not seeing the world around you, right? So many of us can just walk through the world, no problem, nothing happens, right? Again, no one's carrying us. We're not being helped in any way. It's just easy. We just glide right through. it's not the same for everyone, right? Some people can't just glide through the world. Right? If they don't watch their head, they're going to get bashed in. And some of us might ignore that. Check your height privilege, right? Without even really realizing what privilege they have. I always imagine this guy with like a New York accent. Can anyone do like a really good New York accent? No? What? I'm just walking here, right? But that's his attitude. Right? He's just walking here. No one's helping him. This is just the life, you know. He doesn't even see his privilege. And then some realize that the world's not fair, right? And they see the smalls and the talls not adapting well, and they want to fix it, right? So they go over and they try to help the talls, right? Bandage up their head, take care of them. Or they see the smalls struggling, they'll come and give them a boost, right? Help them up to success. But they're really kind of reacting to a symptom of the problem. They're not actually fixing anything. They may even over time get frustrated, right? Why do I always have to keep helping the smalls? You know, why can't they just do it themselves from now on? You know, why do the talls keep banging their head? You know, why don't they learn? So to fix it, right, we can't just keep addressing the symptoms, right? We can't all just become woke and stop seeing where things aren't fair. We actually have to change things. We have to change society. Right? Make the archways bigger, add rungs to the ladder so everyone can get up to success. Similarly with the rat race, right? We have to adjust the rat race, you know? Why does it have to be this solid wall? Why can't there be a ramp? Right? Why does the tunnel have to be that big? Why can't it be larger to accommodate more people? The monkey bars go at an angle so more people can address them. So if we do these things, we can try to make the world more accommodating. That's really to fix the root problems, not just keep addressing the symptoms. Okay. Is that very short?
Okay, thank you, Bill. Let's do questions. Anybody have a question? Okay. Wait, I should have said, wait for the microphone so we can get it on the audio.
How old is your daughter?
17.
When did you give? And when did you give this presentation to her?
Well, recently, actually.
Okay.
No, but the discussion happened, it was about a year and a half ago, I think. Yeah, the presentation, I was actually thinking of doing it to like a skeptic camp. I just never got around to it. And then when Butch said he was short of speakers, I said, well, I have this presentation I've been working on. You know, you could use that 1 month. So that's why I'm here.
Bill had his Superman cape on that day. Anybody else?
Actually, that reminds me of, there's a graphic it's supposed to be a discussion or to represent the difference between equality and it's something like equal access versus
Equity and equality.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have you seen that graphic? It's a difference between, what was it, equity and equality?
Equity versus equality, so it shows three people that, It's a picture that shows three people looking through a fence. This is what you're thinking of, right? And it starts out as a solid fence that they can't see over it to watch like a baseball game or whatever's going on. And so one of them is, one is tall, one's medium, one's short, and only the tall one can see over the fence. So then they talk about if they treat them equally, well, only some of them are going to be able to see over the fence. Like none of them have any support to be able to see over it. If they give them different supports based on their needs, so the shortest one got like 3 little blocks to stand on, and the next one got 2 little blocks to stand on, now they can all see over it. And then if they remove the obstacle, so they change the solid fence into a mesh fence, now they can all see without needing those extra supports. So that's actually tied into the talk you were giving about removing those systemic barriers that are in society versus giving those extra supports when you see the inequity. So equality or treating equally would be where they're all given like that 1 box to stand on, but now only one can see, versus equity, which is like allowing that you're going to need to give more support to some. So that's what you were thinking of.
Okay, any other questions? Oh. If we could ask questions in order from left to right, that would be a lot easier.
Come on, you need your exercise.
I think I see a lot of this in housing today. You know, Allentown's a perfect example. You know, it's going through this boom, and it's building all these luxury apartments, and it's driving out all the affordable housing, which is not getting replaced. And you look at these major cities, and I'm wondering now, as it's starting to cross over into the white race, nobody can afford to live in these cities unless you work for a tech company. I mean, housing is just drying up for these people. I'm wondering now, as it's starting to affect more and more of just middle-class, hardworking people, if it's going to open our eyes. You know, we've pushed people out of neighborhoods for years. When, you know, Bill Clinton famously built his offices post-presidency in Harlem, it just gentrified the whole neighborhood, and all these people lost affordable housing. So I'm wondering what it's going to take, and maybe if it starts to hit the white masses, if it's going to wake us up. Because housing to me has always been, I don't understand homelessness. I cannot picture having a bad day and having nowhere to go and feel safe. I just can't wrap my mind around what it's like to be homeless. And it's a disgrace that happens in this country. So housing's always been a thing with me. But as I read more and more about nobody being able to afford you know, it would take 3 weeks out of four of salary just to pay for a crappy apartment. So what do you think is going to finally turn this around?
My short answer is I don't know. I mean, it's really difficult. So many people today are, you know, voting against their own self-interest. So with that going on, I mean, how are you going to affect change if people aren't going to actually vote to fix the things that they want? I don't know.
And I think that Ruth brings up a good point, that understanding the problem is important. But I mean, if we could open it up to the audience, if anybody had any suggestions, solving the problem is a whole other thing. So.
Actually, another question. And this is, yeah, I noticed that the height that you chose is my height.
Oh.
So I'm 5'9". I'm white. I'm cisgendered. So I've grown up with various types of privilege, and I didn't realize it until I got to a certain age. And around the time when I'm realizing this is when actually some of the privilege that I was used to, I was losing because of our economics, because of I'm on disability currently. I'm not employed. I was harassed out of a workplace. So what we see is we see people who are in my position who don't realize that they have had that privilege, and so they're standing there saying, "Yeah, well, look at me. You know, this is how do you talk to someone who is in that kind of position where yes, they've had some terrible things happen to them." And so they think that it's still all about them, and they think, oh, well, I had to struggle, so everyone else has to struggle. I don't know if I even asked that question right, but have you got into conversations with someone from that situation when you're trying to explain privilege to them, and they say, well, I'm not privileged? I think that's kind of what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very difficult for people, you know, as I try to point out, to see the privilege. Right? So it's so hard when things just work. It's so hard to see that it's not working for everyone. What the reason is, right? Because they often fall back on, oh, well, you know, it's my own greatness inside me. That's why I achieved and they haven't, right? In a lot of cases, I think it's, you know, lottery fallacy, right? People don't really realize that, you know, not everyone can be a movie star, right? There's, you know, how many thousands of people for every one star who are struggling actors, right? And a lot of them are really good. If you've gone to local productions, you see amazing actors, and it's, you know, why didn't they make it? And some of the ones who did make it are so poor at acting. It's that lottery, right?
When I get into discussions, or rather arguments with people online about this kind of thing, I often
Well, don't argue online.
Yeah, it's self-injury, right? I usually try to bring up the concept of survivorship bias. Because we look at the people who, or rather the people who get through a certain challenge don't realize that it was specifically difficult. So they see themselves as the model. If I did it, anyone else can do it. So.
Yeah, it's very similar.
Okay, Harley?
Yeah, I think one of the problems is that the people who are falling behind, certain people appeal to their imagined past of being on top, and they turn them against the people, other people who are having problems. And this is the problem we're having right now, where people are voting for somebody who is not their friend. And so they put all their problems off on these other people. It's their fault. It's black people's fault. It's immigrants' fault. It's Jews' fault. It's whoever's fault that we're having these problems. And I don't know whether the problem of knowing your privilege has anything to do with this issue. You know, I think the idea of privilege is twisted to work against themselves. That's all I can say. But I think but politics really hurts a lot in these situations, that people can be misled so easily.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fear, right? Like the healthcare debate, I think, is a good example of it, where to make healthcare better, we have to change things, right? We really have to take insurance companies out of it. But people feed on that fear of, oh, I'm going to lose the healthcare I have today. Well, you're really losing your health insurance, not healthcare. Right? Your healthcare is now going to be provided by the central system, if that would go through. And I've actually experienced socialized medicine. I had an appendectomy in Canada when I was up there for work, and it was fine. They took care of me. I didn't necessarily have the latest endoscope treatment that we might have here, but I was taken care of just fine and recovered, and there was no problems. And their citizens all get that, right? They don't have to worry about copay or any of the deductibles that we have to worry about, or going bankrupt. And so many people are just feeding on that fear of what you're losing. I negotiated this great health insurance, right? They call it health care, but it's really, they got an insurance plan that is really great. And they're like, oh, I don't want to lose that. My union negotiated for me. But you're going to gain something almost equally as good, and now everyone's going to get it. So people keep working against their self-interest.
It's no fun getting good health care if the tall people and the short people get it too. So, Tina wanted to have a question.
Yeah. I have always been at loss where someone uses example of my race or my thing, saying oh, these people can do it better. That's why other people should be able to do it better. And I don't like it when they use us as an agency to spread their hatred or something.
Yeah, if one minority can do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I never, because I don't have the cultural or historic reference as everyone who grew up here would, I never had an answer to give to that. But I don't like being that person who's being used to say oh, if she can do it, why can't others do it? You don't know anything about me. You don't know anything about the others you're talking about. Then how can you talk like that without understanding any reference to it? So I never realized how to answer when I'm being used without my permission as an agency to spread that kind of message. So if anyone has an answer to that, I'm open to hear. Yeah, it's one minority is doing it, why can't the other minorities do it like that?
And that was those whole thing that fed into more racism in the 1930s, I think it was, specifically.
You should say that all over
Searching
again.
people with the microphone availability.
We need many more microphones.
No, I don't have a good comeback for that. I'll think about it.
I need that answer. 'Cause I hate it when people do that. Like, I'm like, because where I come from, like, there are a lot of people who didn't make it like that. It's just that people are seeing the cream crowd, so they're making assumptions that everyone back in India are like that. But they're not all software engineers, or they're not all
Right.
doctors. You're just seeing just cream crowd, and you're making assumptions, and then you're based on those assumptions, you're like, an entire group of people. You're saying, oh, sorry, like if these cream crowd people can do it, why can't these people do it? And I'm like, you don't know all those millions and billions of people home who can't do it. Like, you're just seeing a cream crowd and you're saying like, oh, they did it, so like all these other people should be able to do it, like, which is just not fair.
Yeah, you're really seeing.
Survivorship bias again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of those people who make that argument that why can't these people do something, the groups they're talking about are usually groups that weren't allowed to have education in the past or
Yeah.
suffered from redlining where they couldn't purchase homes and they don't have, the generational wealth built up behind them. And I can imagine being denied education for generations must have a huge on how they see the world and what paths they can imagine to success.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say, I don't think looking at it as, it's the cream of the crop that can adapt. It's the ones who, using the analogy, it's the talls that happen to be shorter and are, close to the same height, right? They're the ones who can fit into the existing society well, so they will adapt, so they do well, right?
Yeah.
It's just others who don't fit in that well, right? They're at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
You have to be able to use as an example in order to defend the system.
Well, that was great. That was like great presentation. Like, it gave me a different way of looking at the problem.
Yes,
Yeah, so Bill, apparently in the presentation you picked out a very straightforward example that like everybody can understand, and it's pretty straightforward to think about the solutions. I'm trying to generalize to what we see in the society and pick two particular issues that I can think of where I can come up with some counter arguments. Okay. So, for example, the first one is, for example, if we talk about women's race, and then we talk about transgender people. And from their point of view, okay, just because I changed from my gender from male to female, I should still be allowed in the race because I shouldn't be like left out. But from the women's or girls' perspective, well, practice days and night, but suddenly somebody who has the physicality of a male person comes in the race and suddenly seems to be very unfair to me. Mm-hmm. So under the existing system, like, there isn't a very good solution because, like, one way or the other, whether you allow the transgender male to female person to participate in the race will be unfair to somebody, and there will be apparently conflicts. So that's the first thing I think about. And the second one is something that's more applied to us, like the different pay difference between males and females. Apparently, we have women are underpaid. And there are good reasons for that, there are bad reasons for that. For example, like, we know that women may potentially be involved in pregnancy, and from an employer's point of view, they have probably solid arguments that, okay, I may have longer employment coming from males than females. So from that perspective, okay, that's not necessarily discrimination. But at the same time, think about like how our American soccer team, like, women perform so much better than the males, but why are they so vastly underpaid than the males? So I'm trying to put it into a perspective and apply to real issues. Like, under an existing system, if you trying to focus on the minority needs, sometimes it may actually be unfair to the real to the majority. Sometimes in the first example. And second one is how do you distinguish between what is actually discrimination and what is not? Yeah. So two questions that I'm trying to apply to real world examples.
Yeah, I mean, sports is tough, but some of it comes down to, you know, where did the sports originate? Where did the rules for the sport originate? The kind of example I have, you know, from my own personal life is being in the military. The physical requirements, you know, your physical fitness test. Right? We have push-ups, sit-ups, you know, go for a 2-mile run, and they actually had to set the standards for women lower than men, right? Which caused, you know, even myself a little bit of, you know, envy and you know, why? What does that matter? You know, what if push-ups are required for doing the job, then they should have to go to the same standard. And you know, it's when I went to actual war and, you know, with female soldiers, and you know, saw, you know, them contribute at the same level in many cases, in certain areas, more, you know, more. And realizing that, well, why is the push-up part of the physical test? Because it was developed when men were the only people in the military, so the men could all do push-ups well, so they said, oh, well, that's, you know, that's the wall that's the right size, right? So it really comes down to, you know, I disagree with having two standards. We really should change the test to actually matter for what the job they're going to do, right? And that's how you can get past those standards. I think sports is, again, it's a lot harder, but I think it's a similar mindset where, you know, why are the rules the way they are that give that advantage? Are they really necessary? Does it really matter, right? In the end, who wins the sports game, you know, what matters, right? People don't get fed after someone wins a championship. It's very arbitrary. And then your second example?
Basically, it's a more broad issue regarding gender and payment difference between salary difference between genders. Yeah. And I think from economics perspective, there are some solid reasons, but there are apparently other reasons that are more towards discrimination. How do you distinguish between the two?
Yeah, it's really hard to distinguish, but I think a lot of the European countries, you know, to try and adapt to that, right? Again, it goes back to the rules of the game, right? So now they have paternity leave, right, where both men and women can now take off for those months, and that really kind of helps equalize it, right? Because if I hire a married man, right, he's got just as much chance of leaving when they have a baby and being out for that same duration of time as the woman. Right? So that helps to equalize, you know, that payback, right? Because in our society, we expect that the man's going to keep working. Right? Again, it's not really, you know, it's probably better for the children if they don't. But this is just how it's always been, right? So we keep doing it. And that's the mindset we have to get around. And it's going to be painful. It's not going to be perfect. Right? We're going to make mistakes, and as we try to change things, people who, you know, were privileged are going to be at a disadvantage in some cases. And it stinks, but I mean, we can't make progress if we're not willing to, you know, sacrifice a little bit.
Okay, this is it. Martha Jane says, you can't ask questions. So none of you have that disadvantage, except me. And the other thing is, we're employers, okay? So all of the conversation that you're having sort of seems strange to us. For example, one thought I had was somebody was blaming the people that are paid high-tech salaries for gentrifying some rat hole down here in Allentown, and that's my fault because I pay them. And I happily pay them. They're worth it. So it's an entirely different perspective, and I don't think equality is a goal. I think you have to make enough money to keep the company going. We've kept our company going for 45 years. Not many people can say that. So there are different perspectives. And I find yours interesting, but, you know, maybe I'm the little creature that has the funny hat or the balding head. But you know, it's funny that I think you need to. There's a compliment to this discussion, which says, let me put this in the viewpoint of someone who isn't an employee or someone who isn't seeking equality, but who's seeking instead superiority. You know, because to succeed in our company, you have to be superior. You know,
Well, yeah,
and if you're not, and you're trying to make, you know, what I insist on from our talented people is they mentor others. And trying to manage that is difficult. Trying to manage that and make money is even more difficult. So, so putting this in the perspective of employees and the downtrodden is somewhat strange to me, because I'm neither an employee nor downtrodden. You know, we've made it the way we've made it.
Yep, you won the race.
Wait, she's got to answer me. She always gets me, you know. No.
Okay, I just want to make him out to not be quite as much of an ogre as he may sound. But
Good luck with that.
yeah, there have been times through the years when a man will stay home with a sick child, heaven forbid, you know, and he actually would get, you know, perturbed about this. And I say, well, why should it always be the woman? Well, I want to say, I think we have a solution going on right now. We've just implemented unlimited paid time off for all of our employees. They don't have to explain why they're taking it. Now, of course, if they really abuse it and don't get their job done, you know, I think the group will take the revenge that needs to be taken. But staying home with your sick child is no different from staying home with the flu yourself with our new system. So I think there's hope.
Well, and that's part of what I hope came across, and maybe it didn't as well, is right. The people who win the race, you know, again, it's not that they cheated, right? It's not that they did anything wrong, right? They still worked hard to win the race, right? It's just recognizing the fact that some people, even if they work just as hard, they can't win the race. Right? There's obstacles in their way, and you know, I'm not saying that people should just give up all their money, right? It just, you know, as a society, we need to make things better, right?
I'm an employer, that's not my role.
As an employer, no. But as a citizen, right, who votes, it is.
If Bill doesn't mind, I'd like to make a little answer to Richard.
Sure.
It's not that the people that you hire don't deserve it, and the people that are displaced out of the gentrified rat hole. And I go back to a quote. Today's my day for quotes. Stephen Jay Gould was an evolutionary biologist, and when Einstein died, they offered him a chance to examine Einstein's brain at the autopsy. And he said, I'm less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's brain than I am in the fact that people of greater or equal talent have lived and died in sweatshops and farm fields for years. So I don't think the question is criticizing the employer, you for hiring the qualified people. It's just that some of the people that are in that neighborhood already, if they had had the opportunity, the education, and the advantages of wealth, or not being in that neighborhood to begin with, they may have been the people you were hiring, but instead they're getting displaced. So, sorry, that's just my... And Harley wanted to bring some...
2 points. One is this argument doesn't have to do with getting to the top. The argument is having an equal chance to get to the top. And I mean, it's not about that we don't want to have the possibility of getting to the top. It's just that it's, as you pointed out, some people aren't given the opportunity to get to the top. And the other thing about gentrification, the problem with that is, well, I grew up in Scarsdale, which was a very gentrified town, and still is. But one of the problems is that a lot of the people that worked in Scarsdale couldn't afford to live in Scarsdale. And that's true of a lot of these neighborhoods where the people that work can't live in the town that they can't live in the same town where they work. And it's not that they want to commute, but they're forced to. I mean, that's why they came up with these housing projects where they could make sure that a certain number of houses within a certain district were local. And I think that's what they have to do with this gentrification thing. They have to make sure that whole like the entire city of Brooklyn doesn't become gentrified, but there are still some neighborhoods that are protected. Because that's what I see happening in Brooklyn right now. And you know, it happens in a lot of places, and it's just not fair. That's all. And it has nothing to do with. Obviously, gentrification is a great thing to happen for certain neighborhoods, but maybe it needs to be done with some foresight instead of just helter-skelter.
Some balance.
Anything else?
The way that I kind of like have always looked at things like this is like everything is a cycle. Like you have one neighborhood where you have kids who are born and they go to a nice school and they get a great education and they go on to a great college that they can afford. And then they get great jobs and they move back into that same neighborhood and they continue that cycle. They have kids who go to the great schools, great colleges, get the great jobs and they move back in. And then you have like other kids who are born in lesser neighborhoods and they don't get the same education as everyone else, and then they don't get the opportunity to go to a good college and get the advanced education that they need, and then they're stuck at a like regular like job, and they move back into their same neighborhoods and they start a family and have the same kids that go to the lesser schools and the lesser educations, and it's a cycle. And like I don't know how we can break that as a society, like break down those walls so that everyone can have the same opportunity to be able and use the knowledge that they have and make their worth, because like it's not fair to like these smart kids who just don't have the opportunity to do these things. Just my standpoint on it.
Well, I'll make a comment to that. I mean, excuse me, sorry. I don't have a clear answer, but to me, I keep encouraging homeschooling. And I hope that people that can homeschool from some of these disadvantaged neighborhoods can take advantage of homeschooling and do better.
Can I comment?
Of course.
So mine would be like, we should have a standard level of education at the country level, like no matter where you're born, where you're living, it should be one standard set of education. That could help with standardized tests and stuff, everything people are. But then again, it's like too un-American, so I don't think I have a right to say that. Like, people would be like, oh, that's too socialist idea or too something like that.
It's always been this way, right? We've always supported our schools with our local tax dollars, so communities with more money have better schools, right? That's just how it's always been. Why should we break that?
Exactly, but it shouldn't be like that. Like,
right.
like how much money you make shouldn't translate to what education your kids get.
That's the rules today, right? Those are some of the rules. I think if we really want to make society better and more fair, we have to change those rules.
Okay, Paul?
Just from the teacher perspective, as far as getting a standard education nationwide, that's very unlikely to happen because education is not in the Constitution. And because education isn't in the Constitution, it falls into state laws, which is why every state has different definitions they give for how they set their education. So some states do have statewide content or standards or curricula that they use. It's usually more by county. In Pennsylvania, it's really by county on what curricula they use. But for having something nationwide, there is federal funding involved, and they kind of bribe states into buying into certain things with federal funding. Like, oh, if you use this program or if you implement more summer support or reading programs or whatever, we'll give you more funding. So that's how they get them to agree to things. But they can never say, everyone has to do this, because it has to be coming from the state. They can tell a state to do everything, like at the state level, but they can't have something nationwide because it's not in the Constitution to be able to do that. So that's why there tends to be such discrepancies in education.
I figured. That's why I said it would be very American. I figured.
Well, and also to the last question about homeschooling, I can tell you I have a lot of students who drop out of school to be homeschooled, and 90% of them a few months later come back and they've done nothing at home. So then they have zeros in the grade book and they have to start from scratch again. So while there are some students, I was homeschooled myself for 6 years, there are some students that if they have that opportunity at home, if they have the parents that aren't working 3 jobs that are able to stay with them, that have an education themselves and are able to support them, if they have all of that privilege, they'll do well homeschooling. But otherwise, they're going to be at even more disadvantage if they're leaving a schooling system to try to do it mostly on their own. Even though it is online for homeschooling now, it's still mostly on your own to do that. So that also doesn't really equalize things to have homeschooling, because you still have issues of inequity and privilege that come into that. So it would be like a nice idea, but it doesn't work for a lot of students. Like I said, I have a lot of them come back and then they're like, yeah, I have zeros now because I haven't done any work at home. So they just don't have a situation where they're able to get it done, or they think that they can get away with not doing it too.
So homeschooling is great because it's a classroom size of 1, but it still depends on the quality of the teacher. Ron?
That's an excellent series of points. In the Pennsylvania Constitution, the legislature is required to provide adequate education statewide. They've never really done it. They've found ways to play with the definition. But when you talk about whether it's an American concept, and free public education for everybody up to a certain grade level, and it used to be 8th grade 100 years ago, and now it's 12th grade, but free publicly provided education for everybody, available to everybody, is one of the pillars of American society, whether it's done on the federal level, whether it's done on the state levels. Got some wacky states, but that's a different topic for a different day. But I would say that free public education is truly one of the pillars of American society, and if our government isn't providing it right, it's a we the people solution. It's not a solution of running away from it.
There's hope.
Ruth has a question, comment?
I find it interesting that America is still thought of as the land of opportunity. You can do anything you want to do. And I just remember reading not too long ago, and I wish I could remember the ranking, but I can't, just how far down on the scale we rank for people ever rising above the station they were raised at. We have just fallen through most of probably the European countries. And I remember asking this at one of our discussion meetings, is I didn't understand this populist movement. Because to me, populism was Bernie Sanders saying, there's this inequality and this, economic and wealth inequality, and that's going to, divide us, and, the poor people are going to get screwed. And that, to me, is what populism meant. And I didn't understand the rise of all this right-wing fascism over in Europe under the term of populism. I couldn't reconcile those two definitions. And I later realized that there's a left-wing populism movement, which is more aligned with the Bernie Sanders thinking, and there's a right-wing populism movement, and it's blame the other people, blame the poor, blame, if your station in life is going down, it's their fault. And I now understand, but it's terrifying to me. I mean, that's how Brexit came about. And we still don't know what that's going to do to the world economy when that all happens. But to see this rising level of, instead of all the people that are getting screwed rising up against the people that are exploiting them, we're fighting amongst each other. And everything that you laid out there is just getting worse, despite all the programs we're throwing at it and despite, the good intentions we're trying to do. It really is getting worse. We're not going to rise above our stations, and that's just my comment.
I'm more of an optimist, so I think things are getting better.
Richard has another question.
Well, there seems to be an assumption that education is good. Just let me remind you that Bill Gates dropped out of college, and the guy at Apple,
Facebook?
Steve Jobs dropped out. And I'm kind of figuring that the key to entrepreneurial wealth is to drop out. So when I was asked by my high school to give a presentation on computer science and entrepreneurship, I said, and they're paying 19 grand a year? I couldn't believe it. Same school Joe and I went to, Biden. And we spent less than 500 a year. So, you know, my thought is, hey, you guys want to be an entrepreneur? Start today. You know, get out of this place. And they invite me back. It was college prep school.
Yeah, but how many people dropped out, right, and didn't become a success? That's what we have to remember.
Right here.
If you only look at the people who made it and ignore all the people who didn't.
I dropped out of college. I'm poor as dirt.
See, there's a counterexample.
I didn't finish, I'm bored.
Bill, I would like to hear some of your optimism. I mean, truly, I would like to hear what you think.
Martha put me through.
Well, I mean, certainly, I think the younger generation is less racist, right, than my generation even. You agree?
Yes and no. I feel like we're definitely making a step in the right direction, but there's definitely a lot still.
It does surprise me just how much, you know, stories from my daughter, how much racism is still around, but it is absolutely better than it was when I was growing up.
It really is.
Do you witness it coming from through their parents?
Oh, definitely. Like, it's just crazy. Like, I don't know, like, seeing kids being so Trump 2020, especially like now, and like seeing just how, I don't know, how I've seen even like Trump's campaigns and things like affect kids at my school who like just his words and stuff and how much like they hurt people like who are like my age, like 16, 17. I don't know, it's just crazy to me how like, I don't know, I'm just finally like understanding how much like our political atmosphere like affects us as like a whole. It's, I don't know, different.
I think there's, excuse me, another thing. Sorry. I think there's another thing, just, and I'm not picking on anybody, but just like high school is a whole different world. I mean, and so that there's a lot of perceptions that I think just if you're in high school, things look worse than they are outside of high school. Mm-hmm. I hope.
The lack of agency.
It depends where you go after high school.
Yes.
What else gives you optimism?
Yeah.
What else allows you optimism?
I think the general trend for science and technology to grow the pie, right? Our ability, you know, even the poorest in our country are still better off than they were 100 years ago, right? And that's because science and technology have helped to expand wealth overall. So it's still not equal, but I think generally it's getting better for most people. And I think that's true around the world, right? As we're expanding, I mean, that's the upside to, you know, globalization. We are now spreading wealth around the world and opportunity.
Not necessarily to throw rain on your parade here, but spreading the wealth around and helping people live longer is not necessarily doing the economy, or I mean the environment, any help, because the more people there are in the world, the more problems we have. And yeah, I don't know. I see a lot of ignorance about going on even in our government about trying to do something for family planning and birth control and whatever. And we're looking at the population doubling again, and there's already way too many people now, and yet they're expecting the population to double. Exactly what's going to happen to the resources of the world. And if they want to stop the immigration coming into the wealthy countries, I don't think it's going to happen. It's just going to get worse. because those people have to go somewhere, and if they have no resources within their country, they're going to come here. And there's no way we're going to be able to stop them.
Are you cheering for?
That was not my choice.
But again, I'm optimistic that, yes, there are growing problems, but I think, ultimately, science and technology will help us to solve them. And it's unfortunate because I think our country, its lack of embracing science is really, we're no longer the leaders in the world, and actually I think that's going to make us tick down further and further. But the countries who do are going to rise. Right? And I think eventually we'll see that and we'll say, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Or we won't, and we'll all crash and burn, I don't know.
We need to colonize Mars.
Anything we do to this planet is never going to be as bad as Mars is currently.
True.
So what happened to your hand? I was thinking technology problems with the nail gun.
Good thing we're not at work, or that would be an HR violation, asking me such questions. No, actually, I had a cyst removed from my hand.
I'm just gonna keep hammering you because I need some optimism. When you talk about less racism with younger people, and I agree, more acceptance of of course, the exceptions, but using your own examples, I see a lot of that because they're not turning out to vote. So I see a lot of that, well, I don't see color. But what are they doing about it? What are they going to do to change normal town? What are they going to do to change opportunities? They may be less racist, but how is that going to translate into change to make it more equal opportunity? To use your own example.
Well, I think historically younger people don't vote as much. So they're really carrying on the same thing that we did, right, when we were younger. So I don't think that's a symptom that they're somehow not as active or going to be as engaged as we are. They'll grow into it. And yeah, if I had all the solutions, I would tell them to you right now. I don't know how to perfectly fix everyone.
I just want to know.
Well, even having this discussion and these thoughts, right, is helpful to help people think about these things and decide when they're voting and doing other things. What do you want to vote for? Is it only your self-interest or is it society's interest?
I mean, Trump's just turned me into such a pessimist. I just need to see a light at the end of the tunnel somewhere.
I can't endorse any candidates, since
No,
we're a charity, but
I'm not saying that. I just look at the world and I think, oh my God, how did we get here? So if somebody is optimistic, I do this online too. These real cheery people. I say, come here, talk to me. I want to know where you're getting your optimism because I want some of that. I want to believe in something again. And
Well, we've been here before in the 1930s and in other periods of our history, so.
And
Yeah,
And we came out of
Richard
it, so
Nixon.
maybe
What the
we'll
hell?
come out of this.
I hope so.
yeah, there's I forget the exact quote, but there's definitely some ancient texts, scrolls and things, and on them they'll say, the kids today just don't respect the values of their elders, right? So that's been going on for years and years. And,
Socrates.
and he's one of them. And but that cycle's been going on forever, and I think the real change, in my mind, is science and technology, right? Again, growing the pie and allowing that greater wealth.
The
We're all-
communication ability that comes out of technology allows for people to be less isolated in little echo chambers of belief, potentially. But then, of course, they can
Boundaries.
create their own online.
Yep. Yeah, and certainly as Facebook and other social media actually feed into the isolation. It's one where I wouldn't have predicted that. I thought it was going to really, make people more empathic to the rest of the world because they would have information from all over the world, and it seems that many people are getting into those isolated chambers.
So we have to figure out how to use science and technology to mediate human behavior.
It comes down to rules, right? I mean, Facebook and all the social medias, they're slowly doing it. They're slowly looking at ways to try and flag false information and try to help break up the echo chambers.
Once they get embarrassed.
Yeah, that's how it always goes, right? Businesses, work in their self-interest, so they're going to wait until being forced, right? So they can't rely on a business.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay.
have-
Well, here, let me give you the mic.
I have one other thing that's really off topic, but my prediction is that when we vote in March or whatever, and when we vote in November, the polls are going to be a mess because of the new machines. So I'm encouraging anybody that wants to vote, get an absentee ballot. And now it's easy to do in Pennsylvania and vote that way.
Yeah, to that, you can get an absentee ballot if you're not going to be there, but you can also get a mail-in ballot in Pennsylvania now.
Mail-in ballot.
Right, which is something that more people should know, and they're not getting the information out there. I gave the information to my local township to put into their newsletter, and people should know that you can now legally vote without an excuse by mail. So, and you can apply for your for the absentee or for the mail-in ballot 1 week before, up to 1 week before the election, and it's got to be in by 8 p.m. It's got to be in their hands by 8 p.m. on election day. Don't wait that long. Sure.
I had heard that sometimes it's easier for them to lose those votes.
Sure, absolutely.
It depends on the competence of the Board of Elections, but if the ballot goes in, and I'll tell you, I'm a judge of elections on election day in our precinct. When you apply for the mail-in ballot, you get put on a list. Once you've returned that ballot to the Board of Elections, there's another list. And if you can go into your polling place or make a phone call and check and see if your ballot has been received at the Board of Elections. If they say no, they got lost in the mail, or somebody stole it, or whatever kind of theory you might have, you can check on that and find out. But yeah, it's going an extra step to check. But once the Board of Elections gets that and the absentee ballots in the courthouse, it's there, it will be counted.
Anything else?
Okay, well, thank you, Bill. Yeah, man.